It's a game of chicken. Who should drop out? Eric Adams, Andrew Cuomo, somebody else? We'll talk about it. This is Nuance. Of course, I'm Mike Scala, an attorney and an MC with ice cream. Joined, as always, by Jay Carter, also known as Timid, the hip hop artist and the chair of BLM Tokyo, sans ice cream, right?
No ice cream over here for me. Did have some non-dairy yogurt earlier, so maybe they're kind of cousins a little bit, maybe. I don't know.
That sounds like an oxymoron to me.
It could be. But I'm kind of curious about who should and who people think should drop out, and would definitely love to get comments in the video to see what people's thoughts are as far as who should drop out. And then, of course, we're talking about in the New York City mayor's race, and
Right.
that would
By the
be
way,
between Adams and Cuomo potentially,
those
right?
are the two, but apparently Slee was in the mix now as well. Although I don't know if you can get him to
He's
drop,
not
right?
dropping
He's
out.
the Republican nominee, but they're trying to coalesce behind one person. On a slightly related topic, as this ice cream starts to melt here, I did kick off two of the candidates recently as an election attorney. Not really kick them off. They were knocked off by the Board of Elections, but they sued to try to get back on. And I was hired to represent the parties that wanted them to stay off the ballot, and we did prevail. So that was a good court case. It was pretty crazy with the witness. Usually with an election case, you don't necessarily get a witness on a stand, but I got to call one, and it was a heated cross-examination and everything about, did you really sign the form to knock him off the ballot and blah, blah, blah. So there was a forensic handwriting report introduced, and it got pretty intense.
You got forensics involved and all of that. That's
Hey,
crazy.
listen, it's the mayor's race in New York City, all right? People will go all out. They should have gone all out when they were collecting their signatures. That was their first mistake.
So this was
Whoa.
yeah, so I guess that leaves, well, Sleeve was being the only one on the Republican side.
Yeah, he won the Republican nomination by default. He was unopposed. By the way, I just took a bite of this. I guess this is coffee lovers ice cream from Cold Stone Creamery.
Hmm.
No, I'm telling you, no, it's not. What is it? Oh, okay. Yes. This is okay. I messed up. You see, I have coffee lovers in the freezer. This is mango habanero. I didn't realize they had a mango habanero flavor at Cold Stone. And so I think
Oh,
I
wait,
was
say it again. Mango habanero?
habanero, right? Which is usually a flavor of buffalo chicken, right? Like if you get the spicy, it's sweet and it's spicy, right? The mango is sweet, the habanero is like a hot sauce. So you combine them, it's a flavor of buffalo chicken that's pretty popular, right? The sweet and the spicy combined. So
Yeah,
they've
but
got an
not
ice cream version of this.
not for ice cream. That sounds weird.
Yeah, listen, I was curious, and I think I took a bite of it expecting it to be the coffee lovers, and I'm like, is that some weird like spicy coffee bean they put on there or something? Because it's got the grain stuff on top. I don't know what it is, but I don't know. Sweet and sour combined is always interesting, right?
Yeah, but for ice cream though, I don't know.
So the mango is actually really good. Now that I got over the initial, I think it's like pepper flakes of the habanero on top. Now that I
Hmm.
go over that initial shock, it is enjoyable. I'm getting more sweet than spice as I go in.
Okay, okay. Well, that's a good
But
thing.
yeah, I will say, while the mango aspect of it is great, that habanero residue reminds me of chicken wings a little too much for when I'm eating ice cream, right? It kind of now I'm like it's kind of like mango ice cream with chicken wing side flavor, which is kind of ruining it a little bit. But it's one of those things where you got to try it once, I guess. I wouldn't try it again, but I'm glad I tried it, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I'll pass. I'll pass on that.
By
Um,
the way, I know we're getting off topic now. We want to talk more about the mayor's race. I did want to give an update, which I never did, on the Japanese snacks. Remember, I had the whole bag of Japanese snacks. I was going to eat them all.
right.
So I did eventually get through all of them. I got to say, I didn't really like any of them. Um, I don't know. It's like one of those things like where I was morbidly curious about what this would taste like this weird combination of flavors you see on the bag, like shrimp crackers or whatever. I'm like, all right, I had it, but I wouldn't go back and get a second bag.
Right, right. Okay, okay. Well, hey, different tastes. Some people love them.
Yeah,
Um,
I tried things in life, and this could be a bottom line in the making, Jay. Sometimes you just gotta try things out.
yeah, absolutely, absolutely. I actually, when I came here, I brought a Japanese snack for as a gift for my grandmother, and I thought it was a cookie type of snack because it was on the same rack with the cookies, and so like it
Mhm.
was a 4 pack, and then there was like a bigger 12 pack or something like that, and so the cookie one had it was open, a clear top so you could see it, and then the other one was gift wrapped. So I was like, okay, well, let me get the bigger one because everyone in the house can have some, and it's gift wrapped, so that's cool. But apparently, it was not the same snack because the gift wrap one didn't have any writing on the outside, and it was on the same thing. So I figured it was the same thing, but it wasn't. And so it was a
Okay.
completely different snack, and this was like a mochi cake thing that had like this kind of root dust on it that you pour like a little syrup on it thing, and it just, yeah. My grandmother
Sounds
tried it. Like you
fancy.
said, try something. My grandmother
Right.
tried it, and she was
Yeah.
just like, they said it's supposed to be cookies."
Yeah. Yeah. Too complicated. Yeah. There was one thing that I did kind of enjoy. It was this bag of sucker candies or whatever, but it rapidly changed flavor. I think when you first put it in your mouth, it kind of overwhelms you with sourness. And then you get past that initial layer of sour and it's sweet soda flavored on the inside.
Okay,
Again,
that sounds cool.
kind of weird, kind of interesting, but I actually kind of grew to like those.
That's cool. I like sour, so
Yeah.
that doesn't sound too bad.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And also, by the way, I just went to a hibachi restaurant and I drank the Japanese soda where they've got these different fruit flavored sodas.
Which one is that?
They actually on the menu it just says Japanese soda, so I'm not sure what it's really called, but there's different fruit flavors. I think I got a melon version, but it comes
Oh,
in a
probably
fancy
the
bottle.
yeah. Say it again.
So it comes in a fancy bottle
With
where you take
the
the top
little
off,
ball?
you push, yeah, exactly. You push it through, and then there's a glass ball in the middle of it, and it fizzes. And I think it's supposed to be a character of some sort because on the label there's a picture of this. So they draw it like a character. It's like a glass ball, all fizzy, and it's got a face on it and everything. But it looks like that in the bottle with the soda fizz around the ball. And I guess it's supposed to entertain children or something. I don't know. It was kind of cool, but it was hard to continue drinking because that glass ball would keep getting stuck in the mouthpiece of where the soda comes out.
Right.
So what's up with that?
Um, it's just a quirky thing, but part of it acts as the a seal. Like it's called ramune, and so the marble kind of acts like a seal. So the carbonation would push the gas up and keep the ball covering the lid, so the carbonation doesn't come out. But I don't think beyond that, I don't think there's any specific reason for it or anything.
Is there a certain technique to drinking it? Because I got frustrated about 3/4 of the way through. I was like, just give me a Coke because I was trying to drink it. And like I said, so you're turning it upside down to drink it, right? And that glass ball also moves towards your mouth then, and it just blocks where the soda would come out. So I just couldn't get more soda out of it eventually.
Yeah, well, I mean, you probably tip it sideways instead
I
of
was
like
trying that.
completely up.
Right. No, I wasn't doing that. I wasn't like, yeah, all right. But I guess there is a, just like, you got to get used to doing it, I guess. What could I say? I don't know.
Yeah. I've had it like once. I don't buy a lot of soda anyway, so
Right.
but
That's the kind of thing that I try to do, right? Like if I'm at a restaurant and I'm looking at the drink options,
right,
Japanese spot, they got Japanese soda. I'm like, let me give that a shot. I don't know what that's going to be like. Let me see what it is.
right.
So,
So
yeah.
okay, okay. Out there trying different things.
Right. So
Venturous.
speaking of trying different things, it seems like the political class in New York City is trying out different candidates here. Which one might be the, you like the segue?
I knew it was coming.
I
I
see
could
it written
feel
on
it.
your face, like, okay, okay.
I
Yeah,
could feel it. And then when you started to say it, I was thinking this could be a segue
this
into
is it.
trying out,
This is it, right?
Mamdani's coming in. He's a little different.
Oh, I wasn't even thinking that. No, but I'm thinking of the different candidates now that will potentially be the alternative, right, to
Right.
Mamdani. Who's it going to be? I think, at one point thought maybe Sliwa might have had a shot or been a factor, especially if the Democratic. I was
Okay.
going to too, but apparently, oh,
All right,
go in the
gotcha.
past. That's me. That's me last week. So we were thinking if the Democratic vote potentially was split, right? Maybe. But the problem is if you're looking at polls now, and this is why polls do matter, right? A lot of people say they don't matter. They matter when it comes to people's perception, right? Like if you're going to start coalescing behind somebody, or how's this race going to shape out leading into the fall. People start looking at this data to kind of get a feeling as to how voters are thinking. And it looks like with Sliwa consistently polling under 10%, he's not really going to be as much of a factor. And maybe Adams or Cuomo could be that alternative if you wanted to have a competitive general election. But would that require someone stepping aside, right? I mean, how would that look? I think what's really going on now, and this is why you can't really trust polls, although people do look at them, is Sliwa didn't have the opportunity to really campaign yet because he was unopposed in a Republican primary. And so he really has been up until now a non-entity in this race. But obviously Cuomo had like a $30 million campaign spend. So his name is very much out there still. Adams is the incumbent mayor, so his name is still out there in some respects, right? So I do think that's why you have Sliwa falling as kind of like a non-factor at this point, and things could change. But when you look at the current state of things, it seems like you would need either Cuomo or Adams to be that alternative to Mamdani if there would be a competitive election.
Yeah. I just saw an article, or at least a headline recently that said that Mamdani just got a brief bump as well in polling.
Right.
I didn't see exactly what it was about, but he did get a brief bump. But I guess, I mean, he's the guy right now, so that would make sense.
Right. And that's the thing. If there is going to be a competition here, right? Any viable alternative, that does need to crystallize at some point because the campaign isn't going to last forever, right? I mean, November is a few months out, but you still do have early voting. And like we said, these numbers start taking shape and they start to solidify a little bit, So you kind of have to have at some point in the near future a clear picture of what this is going to look like.
Right. Well, I think, the problem with that is we have the clear picture now, but Democrats are fighting that clear picture.
And why is that?
Well, I think there's a variety of reasons, right? Mamdani, he's a very unconventional candidate for the Democratic Party, not only because of his religious background, because of his far progressive stance that he takes. He's a new guy on the scene. It was
It's
like
more than being a new
33.
guy on the scene, though. Yeah,
I mean,
I
all
think
of these things, all of these
all
things, I
right,
think,
all
yeah,
of it combined. I think the biggest thing is running as a self-described democratic
and
socialist, right?
right
Well, let's keep in mind because I do see a lot of people saying, well, Democrats always say vote blue no matter who, but when it's a progressive, now all of a sudden,
there.
but that is a very disingenuous thing to say, right? Either people who say that are being purposely obtuse, or they don't, they're just ignorant, I guess. They don't realize what they're talking about because a lot of the people in that Bernie Sanders lane, which is kind of where he's coming out of, right, had always said that they were not actually Democrats. They were running with the Democratic banner as a matter of expediency, right? Because they thought winning third party wouldn't be feasible for them. So they're going to
It's
kind of
not
co-opt the Democratic brand to
sure.
become the dominant. But they didn't self-identify as Democrats. Even Bernie Sanders, when he ran for president, refused to change his party to Democrat, right? Even though he ran in the Democratic primaries. And so I think it is fair to say, well, we don't have to vote for anyone who wins the Democratic nomination, even if they're not a Democrat, right? You're just taking over our party and saying we have to vote for you now. Like, come
Is
on.
Mamdani a Democrat?
I think it's fair to ask him, does he identify as such?
Is he a Democrat? That's the question. Is he a Democrat?
We need to ask. That needs to be asked. But here's the thing: I don't think he would answer it
But is he
because,
registered as a Democrat?
oh, sure, he's registered, but that's not what I'm
Please.
talking about. It's not just a matter of being registered. Anyone can register. I could register as whatever. You can register as whatever. That doesn't matter. The question is, do you identify as such, right? And
I
I don't think he would answer the, honestly, look, I think it's a question that should be posed. I don't think he would want to answer it because he doesn't want to alienate his base that doesn't consider themselves actual Democrats. That's the problem. And it is kind of an identity crisis of the Democratic Party that you're seeing, but I think there's good reason for it.
Well, I think to me that sounds more like just protectionist rhetoric to me. And that's what's happening a lot right now around what's happening with Mamdani because he won the Democratic primary fair and square. He beat the Democrats who are hardcore Democrats. He beat Cuomo, who is been the favorite even before he started running. So
Right.
fair and square, Democratic election. Mamdani comes out on top. And then now the Democrats are talking about, oh, we need to run someone against him because we don't agree with this. That to me is going to push them further away from the people. People already have issues with trusting the party and the process. And if they do
But
this,
here,
it's very unfair to the electorate, and it's
I
gonna
disagree.
gonna
No,
lose
no, no.
them people.
I think you're off the mark on that because they're not trying to take him off the Democratic line. They're not saying we're going to replace him as Democratic nominee, right? There is a Democratic nominee, but that doesn't mean that there shouldn't be a competitive election. You should be able to give people a choice. You're not creating more distrust by having more options to vote for in November.
If the Democrats are running someone extra, yeah, it is creating distrust.
Well, it isn't necessarily the Democrats running someone extra. These are people who are already on the ballot. Let's be clear. They already have ballot lines. Adams petitioned as an independent candidate. He has an independent ballot line. That was his
Sure.
choice. The
Yeah.
Democratic Party didn't run Adams as an
No,
independent.
no,
He said,
absolutely.
right? He said, I'm not running as a Democrat because he saw he wasn't going to win a Democratic primary. Fine. He chose to run as an independent. That was his option. Cuomo
Absolutely.
also ran, he petitioned to get an independent ballot line. So they have the independent ballot line already. The question is who's going to actually campaign for the general election? I mean, whether they campaign or not, their names will be on the ballot, right?
Right. Well, I'm not
So,
talking about Cuomo or Adams. I'm talking about
okay.
the Democratic Party. If
Okay.
they're talking about, okay, they're not happy with who won,
Right.
and I'm sure there are a lot of people who aren't especially in the establishment part of the party, not happy that a Democratic socialist,
Yeah.
someone that's, ma'am,
Listen, I agree with you. I agree with you to the extent that I don't think the Democratic Party officially, right, the party apparatus should be endorsing somebody else. No, they've got
right.
a nominee. That's
That
the
that's my
nominee.
point.
They've got to live with it. Yeah. But I'm talking about the voters now are going to have a choice and they should have a choice. And there are people who petitioned, right? We talked about the process. People got on the ballot for the general election. So I don't think it creates more distrust with the voters for there to be a choice. If you want to vote for Adams and independent, that's your prerogative. You don't have to,
Right.
right?
No, no,
It's up
that I
to you
agree.
to
I
do what
agree
you
with
want.
that. I agree with that. It's, the general is open for whoever to run in the general, but
Yeah.
my point is just simply that the Democrats should not be crying foul because they're not happy with who won their thing, and he won fair and square. And then some people want to strategize and say, because I think it was Patterson came out and
Yeah.
was talking
And
like,
that's perfectly fine because there are valid points there. All these people, like we said, there is no they, right? Is there not like magic people like pulling strings from the sky? They
it
don't
is a they.
they don't speak on behalf or for the Democratic Party. They all have their own voices and they're free to use them as they see fit. And I think there is validity to the notion that if Mamdani were to become the mayor, it could hurt Democrats, especially in certain areas, right? Like I would be worried about my area of Queens. You know how close it was? Well, knock on wood here, right? But you know how close it was with, for example, our Assemblywoman, Stacey Amato. She won a couple of years ago after a recount by what, 16 votes, but she was behind on election day. Then, of course, we helped her out with the firm and we got her up to, amongst other people, other parties, but we got all of us helped get her to like 1,000 point cushion this past time. But if you have Mamdani in office, what's that going to do to her, for example? Is that going to give her a much harder road to reelection? What if the Democrats here try to take the city council seat like we've been looking at? Is that going to be harder with someone like Mamdani in office here? You know what I mean? I think that is something that you should really be thinking about. Like, how many seats is this going to cost Democrats throughout the city and throughout the state?
You thinking that if he becomes mayor, that it's going to make other seats too vulnerable? You think why would
I
that
think it's
even,
going to make it a lot harder for a Democrat to get elected in areas
why would you
that are
say
more
that?
competitive.
Why would you think
Because
that?
because there's going to be so much backlash to those policies. There already is, if you look what people are saying. But if he gets into office, right, there's going to be so much backlash locally in these pockets that it's going to be hard, I think, for any Democrat to win. The energy is going to be so much more on the Republican side, and it's going to be a harder case to make that, I'm a local Democrat, I'm trying to fight for the people, and I'm focused on local issues. Like we talked about, the lightning rod effect. If you have something like this, right, someone like him in office who is unabashedly on the far left, it makes it harder for you to focus on what we call up-down issues, local issues, and it puts the focus more on hyper-partisan politics. You're going to have a lot more people. If I'm knocking doors around here, a lot more people are going to say, I'm never voting for a Democrat. You guys are destroying us. Look what the mayor is doing. That's the kind of thing that you hear.
Yeah, I could see there being some effect there, but I mean, I think you get that with anyone in, Adams
Not to that
in,
degree. Like
Adams in, and people are like, yeah, they're screwing things up. What was the guy before Adams?
de Blasio.
De Blasio.
And
Yeah,
that's my point. It was very hard for a Democrat to win in these districts with de Blasio in office. It was easier with Adams in office. It will be
but
easier with Cuomo in office.
but
If you
here's the
have someone who's more in line with that district, it's easier to win as a Democrat here. And because we're talking about districts that are precarious, right? I'm not talking about there are districts that are safe throughout the city. Many districts in New York City are safe Democratic seats, and there are some that are solid Republican seats, right? But there are a lot of districts, like, for example, the one I'm in is 3-1 Democrat on paper. But the way people vote, they vote more conservatively. And a lot of it depends on what's going on at the national level, state level, and, citywide level. It affects the mood of the electorate. And when you're conceding here that it can have some effect, well, some effect makes a big difference. We just talked about our assemblywoman won by 17 votes. You know what I mean? So some effect is the difference between winning and losing.
Well, I think that's a very good point. But how do you answer to the fact that apparently the electorate wants what Mamdani is pushing?
The electorate is not monolithic.
He
We're talking
won.
about a citywide
He
race.
won.
He did not win every single district, not win every
But
single area.
he won overall.
Right, right. What happens citywide, what happens statewide, what happens nationally is not the same as the electorate in given district, various districts,
Yeah,
right?
sure. Yeah, he
So,
could lose in some areas, win in
right,
some areas. Absolutely. But
right.
overall, he won so that, the people in the party largely said, you know what,
Listen, you get what you
let's try this
deserve. You
way.
get what you deserve, right? If people want to vote for this and Democrats want to keep losing, okay, then they're
You
going to keep
know,
losing, right? But that's, I'm just saying what's going on.
I think Democrats losing to me has partially to do with, and I'm not going to say everything, but partially to do with the way that they're reacting with the fact that Mamdani won. How they are so protective of what they feel is the establishment that they should be pushing that
It's not about the establishment though. That's
it
like,
is
again, that's like that
so.
pie in the sky, they conspiracy theory stuff. It's not there's some of that there. I shouldn't discount that entirely, but that's not what the backlash is all about. There are very serious policy concerns people have.
Sure, I get that, but listen, the one thing that he did very well, it seems, is to reach out to the people, especially the younger folks, the Gen Z,
Mm.
the millennials, that the broader Democratic Party does not reach too well.
Well, let me ask you
And
this. Are they going to come out in local races? I'm not talking about
that
hyper
we
local.
don't know. We don't
Right.
know. Here's the thing. For them to come out in local races, that would mean those candidates might have to take a page out of his book to
But
reach out to them in that way.
that's
If
a little
you're
naive, in my
ignoring
opinion.
them,
I mean, I understand what you're saying on paper, but in practice, it tends not to work out that way, right? And
sure,
people
I
say
get that.
you have to have a more inspiring local candidate. Most people can never be inspired by a local candidate because they're not programmed to think that it matters. You can try to do some education and outreach and try to pull some more people out than usual, but most people can't really be reached that way. A mayor's race, a presidential race, that's like more sexy to people. You know what I mean? Like to try to get people to come out for a local school board election or something like that.
Sure.
It's not the same energy. It never is.
No, that's absolutely true. But I think there is a big loophole, not a loophole. There's a big gap, a big hole in Democratic in the Democratic Party's outreach and campaigning. And a lot of it is missing Gen Z and millennials. A lot
Mm-hmm.
of is taking
Sure.
minorities for granted.
Sure.
A lot of it is mismessaging that isn't working. And
Right.
for someone like Mamdani, who should not have beaten someone like Cuomo, uh, the fact that he was able to do
And
so
we,
says
okay, finish your
that
thought.
he's reaching a point of people that feel like they haven't been heard and feel like they are being heard a little bit at least.
Yes, and can we also acknowledge that Cuomo probably ran one of the worst primary campaigns in history?
Well, he thought
And
it was his. He thought it was his
right,
regardless.
and that is what he is telling people now, right? If you look at what sources close to him have been saying, they're saying that he told them that he basically didn't have to campaign because the polls showed he had such a big lead.
Right.
He thought flooding the airways with commercials would be enough.
Right.
And to be
Sure.
honest here, if he were to be elected, he would be the oldest mayor in New York City history. So let's
Right.
not, people don't think of him as an old man, I don't think, but he is getting up there in age and would be the oldest. And I don't think he had the energy, quite frankly, to be out there knocking doors and running around. Running a campaign is hard. I think
Sure.
he
Sure.
thought he was going to coast on his name recognition and his money, right? Like we said, flooding the airways with commercials. And that's not enough. You got to do a lot more than that. So,
Right. I mean, Hillary thought the same thing, and
right.
she thought this was mine. This is mine regardless, and she
But you
didn't.
got to understand, right? You're right, and that's a presidential race where you're not going to be campaigning in the flesh as much because it's a
Right.
whole big country to cover, right? When you're talking about a mayor's race, yes, it is New York City. It is the biggest city in the country, so it isn't like a local race, but it's
Right.
still a municipal election. You still have to pound the flesh. You still have to be out there knocking doors,
Right.
making phone calls, showing up to, you know what I mean? Like you got to be out there, and he just wasn't enough. And he had also liabilities with his history, right? Those even though
Sure.
it was talked about how there were no charges against him or anything like that, everything was dropped legally. He still had the baggage of the sexual harassment claims and things like that.
Right. Absolutely. Absolutely. Well, let me before we came on here, I saw an article here, or at least it was a clip um of Sliwa on Fox News, and
Mm-hmm.
he was addressing these attacks on Mamdani. And his point was, saying that basically they should stop some of these things because you know, it could help him more. And I think he was addressing Republicans, but
Right.
um, part of it also would reached out to Democrats. So, for example, he was saying that, he was gaining ground because other campaigns had ignored younger and more diverse communities, whereas Mamdani's didn't. He was saying that people shouldn't be going after him for his religion on Islam because that's going to further push people away from potentially conservative voters because now you're attacking their religion. He's basically saying, listen, let's just focus on these issues. Let's bring it back
Do
to
you know what
issues.
he's saying? What
What?
he's saying is, I'm polling at 7%, and I need more people on my side, so I can't just stick with the far right xenophobes. I need to
Right.
get some more moderate to liberal voters on my side. That's what he's saying.
I wouldn't, I wouldn't doubt it. I don't know much about the guy, even though we were surprised about
Right.
his platform. But a lot of the things that he was saying on Fox News was, in line with some of
Yeah.
the surprising things we said. Like he was saying that the issue with Mamdani checking African American and Asian was a non-issue. People shouldn't
Right.
be going after him.
But
Trump
he kind of
talking
is
about
both, right?
investigating him makes him
Well,
look like, huh?
I was gonna say, yeah, he is both in a sense. He's
He
born
was
in
born in
Uganda and he has
Africa.
an Asian background.
Yeah. Um, so yeah, he was saying that the threats from Trump to investigate his citizenship or deport him
Yeah.
would make Mamdani look like a victim, like he's
Right.
being attacked, and probably draw more people to him. And instead, they should focus on, again, policies, like him talking
Yeah.
about defunding police and the city-owned supermarkets and this thing.
Yeah. And I agree with that, and I also think he's trying to make himself, like I said, more palatable to a
Right.
New York City-wide electorate. He doesn't want the Fox News narrative to be the compelling story here because that's actually going to hurt him if he's
Yeah, that
trying to
won't
get
win him.
more. Right.
Yeah,
If he's trying to gain more votes in New York City, he can't be in that lane. He needs a broader base. He's running now a general election campaign, or trying to, which is
right.
about expanding your numbers. And one thing I wanted to mention is we talked about Sliwa's low poll numbers thus far. Well, there was an interesting poll that came out also that asked voters this. They said, which of the candidates would you never vote for? Would you not consider voting for? And Adams did very poorly in that poll.
Mm.
And Mamdani did, I think Mamdani was around 45%, so they would never vote for him. But Cuomo actually had the most amount of people who said that they would vote for him. Or really, the best way to say it is he had the least amount of people who said they would never vote for him. Right. So people hate him the least of those three, which is what Cuomo seems to be using now as his talking point. Like, hey, look, I got the only shot here. But again, what's not, I think, read from those numbers is that he's coming off of a $30 million spend
Right.
on his behalf. And so things are going to be skewed, obviously, based on what's happened, in the primary season.
Right. And then my question is, where were those people during the primary?
Well,
I don't know who the poll was directed
yeah,
specifically at. Probably wasn't just Democrats, probably
exactly. That's
citywide.
the difference. General election voters. Also, don't forget that the turnout was only around 30% of the eligible Democratic voters. Now, comparatively speaking, that's actually on the high side, which maybe is a depressing thing, right? Because we want to see more than 30%. It was a pretty big number comparatively, but it also means that the majority of the Democrats didn't vote at all.
Right. Yeah. I think we saw something like that even in the presidential election.
Sure.
It's something like it was like 70, Trump got like 75 million votes, Harris like 72, 73, but there were like 96 million eligible voters who didn't vote at all or something ridiculous like that. It's like that's very kind of shameful. It's pretty shameful.
Does that speak to a need for, I mean, this is like the whole debate that you always see, right? Does
Right.
that speak to a need for more exciting candidates, or is it just some people, no matter what happens, no matter who's running, what you do, what goes on in the country, in the city, that is not going to vote regardless?
Right. Yeah. So
Yeah.
let's get to what the topic here that we talked about at the top of the show here
Paul,
is who
or the
should
ice
drop
cream?
out.
Okay, who should top out?
Not
Yeah.
not the ice cream.
So, Sliwa could be in this mix also, but I don't want to put him in the poll because that's to me like a cop out. I think if you put him in there, people will just say, "Oh yeah, he should drop out." But I want to know between Adams and Cuomo specifically.
Right. Yeah. I don't think yeah, Sliwa is the
He's the
only guy
Republican
running
candidate.
right now.
Yeah. But to be fair,
Although
there is talk. When I say talk, I'm saying there's an attempt
yeah.
to get him out. So it's kind of like these three candidates are all calling each other and they all agree that there should only be one of them running, but they all think it should be them who's the one who runs.
Right. Well, also after this after the primary and Mamdani won, Sliwa became the candidate for the Republicans. The far right MAGA supporting type
Mm-hmm.
of billionaire couple of guys came together and was or came out and started posting, no, we need to run someone else. So
Right.
even them on that side are potentially looking at putting someone to run against in their mayor's race to, I guess, transplant Sliwa. Like
Which
it
did not happen. So let's be clear from an from an election law perspective, right? There is a mechanism now for candidates to decline the nomination for the general election after the
Mm.
primary, which is new, right? This wasn't always a thing. It's an option now, so you don't get someone stuck on the ballot who doesn't want to be there, who's just eating votes or whatever. But we're past that deadline, and so Cuomo, Adams, and Sliwa will all be on the ballot regardless. Now they cannot get themselves off. So the
But the
question is,
Sliwa, I don't think he's wanted to get off. He hasn't said
he
anything
didn't
about
want to get off, but like you said, there was pressure, right? There was talk from certain leaders. They were going to try to get him a job somewhere or convince him to not to run for the sake of beating Mamdani, whatever. It just didn't happen, is my point. They can still convince these candidates not to campaign actively and maybe say, I support someone else or whatever, but their names will physically be on the ballot now.
But I think they were trying to put someone else on the ballot.
That's what I'm saying. And they passed that deadline to do so, so they can't.
So no one else can jump on the ballot at this
No,
point.
no,
Not even an independent or anything like that.
no.
No. Okay. What about write-in? They could do a write-in.
Yeah, you can do it right in. Yeah, good
So
luck. So yeah, but the
so
question is, when we talk about dropping out now, we really
right.
mean should they stop campaigning and potentially endorse someone else, even though the name will be on a ballot? That happens. Like we saw Jessica Ramos was still on the ballot for the primary. She didn't get a lot of votes
And
because
got
people
votes.
knew she got some, but not a whole lot because people knew she wasn't actively in it anymore.
All right. So basically at this point the question is who should drop out? Cuomo or Adams is
Yeah,
basically the two.
yeah.
You wouldn't expect the nominees, the ones that won, to be dropping out. So
Right. Although Saliba was unopposed, so sometimes there are placeholders. I'm not saying he is one, but you do see that sometimes where they'll put a placeholder on the ballot line, especially if they know it's not going to be competitive, right?
right.
And then they'll swap them out or have them not run or whatever. But
True.
all right, so let's ask the people, and again, no cop outs here. So we don't want to hear both, neither. They all should drop out. They all suck. We don't want to hear that on this poll. We're forcing you to choose one or the other, right? Like you're voting someone off the island here, right? So if you come back and you start commenting, everyone, we're just not going to read your comment. We're going to focus on people who actually engage with the question this time. So the poll question of the week is: which of the two candidates do you think should drop out of the mayor's race? Andrew Cuomo or Eric Adams?
Okay. All right. So, being that you've put the question out there, in your opinion,
Mm,
which should drop
it's a tough
out
one.
of
It's a
the
tough one. Adams is the mayor. Let's not forget.
right?
Does seem to have a shot, maybe not the greatest shot at reelection, and he's saying it is arrogant of Cuomo to ask him to drop out because he just lost the primary by 12 points or whatever.
That's it.
You
Okay.
know? So
Yeah.
it is tough. It's a tough ask, I think, you know, to say the mayor should not run for reelection if he wants to run for reelection. Like, you should.
Right.
But if you look at the numbers right now, they do indicate Cuomo has a better shot at winning than Adams. With that
Right.
said, if Cuomo were to do it, he would have to run a lot of a better campaign than he did in the primary. He would have to take it a lot more seriously. I don't know if he's up to the task. I don't know if he has the energy to really do that. And I think the numbers looking good for Cuomo, again, like I mentioned, that may be simply because of all the money that was spent to promote him
Mm.
and all the people who had voted for him coming out of the primary, right? Whereas Adams wasn't campaigning until now. So
Mm.
Adams didn't run in the primary. So you might expect Adams to look a little bit worse, and Sliwa for that matter, than they actually could potentially get to, given the fact that they never campaigned until this point.
Right. You didn't answer the question there, counselor.
Well, that is the answer. I said, if you're going to make me choose right now, and I acknowledge that we don't have a whole lot of time, Cuomo appears to be in a better position than Adams. So if you make me vote in this poll, I would say Adams should drop out, I guess. But like I
Yeah.
said, it is a tough ask now. Maybe it's too early to make that call, but then again, like you don't have a whole lot of time. So what are we waiting? Like, which ships are we waiting to fall? You know what I mean? Like, what are we waiting to see what's going to happen before deciding this?
Right. Yeah, and yeah, that like you said, I think what you brought up was important to consider as far as not Adam, yeah, Adam's numbers being lower is
Yeah.
he really wasn't campaigning.
Right.
And so might things change once, he gets on the trail and starts really putting in the effort. Same with Sliwa, we'll see what these numbers are looking like. Will
Also,
Mamdani's numbers come down?
right.
Um, you know,
Also, you have to look at the funding. And I know this is kind of a circular question at this point because the funding is going to determine who's more viable. So right now we're trying to ask basically where should the funding go? Where should the support go? But in order to answer that question, we kind of have to see who's getting more support initially, right? Like the business community that was backing Cuomo, some of them are pulling out their support of him. And he's trying to convince them to retain it, to say, hey, listen, I can still win the general election. And so we have to look at things like that over the next couple of weeks, I guess, right? Like to what extent are these candidates retaining their support or picking up more support than they had, in terms of people who can fund their campaign
right.
or organizationally, unions, right? Groups, things like that.
Now, that's where I think there's a question. I don't know how high. I guess we'll see how much support the Sliwa is getting, but
Mm-hmm.
as far as the Democrat side, even though Cuomo and Adams are on the independent line,
Right.
funding wise, they would be in the Democrat category. So those donors would be
Yeah.
Democrat donors. So they could be, you got three candidates now running basically from the Democrat funding pool
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
that could be pulling from the Democratic nominee the money that he gets to run his campaign against Sliwa. So
Maybe.
potentially they could be hurting the Democrats' chances of taking the seat if Sliwa, gets all the Republican vote.
Yeah. And that's what we had thought could have happened initially. It's just right now, if you look at the numbers, he's almost a non-factor in the race.
Right.
That could
For
change
now.
for
But
now.
like you said,
For
he
now,
hasn't run the
yeah,
campaign yet.
exactly, exactly. Things will change a little bit. How much is yet to be seen, but it is interesting that you might expect, like you said, all the Republican support to be going to Sliwa and the Democratic support to be split three ways. And oh, look at this, Sliwa's right in the mix. So far, we're not seeing that. So far, it seems like Republicans, maybe more conservative voters, are thinking a little bit more pragmatically about this, and they're saying we have to stop Mamdani, and so we're going to put our support behind whichever candidate we think is most viable to do that. I'm seeing more conservatives say, let's vote for Adams now, for example, or Cuomo for that matter, right? So I think people are looking at that. That's why I said polls matter, because people
Right.
will start to look, right? They're looking at that and they're going, I even see some Republicans commenting, like, ideologically, maybe they're more aligned with Sliwa because he's the Republican. But if he's looking like he's got no shot in hell, they're going to want to put their support behind someone they think can win.
Right. And as far as Adams is concerned, for me, I think Adams should be the one to drop out. I know he's the mayor, but
Yeah.
to me, I think he's very compromised at this
Mm-hmm.
point. His loyalty is very compromised. His uncomfortable connection with the Trump administration and what could be done for him.
Mm-hmm.
Um,
That is true.
I think
This
it
is why, by the way,
looks
we should pull
suspect.
up these numbers. This is why most people say they would not support Adams ever. But that's the
Right.
question. Like, which one would you never vote for? Adams scores the highest on that question.
Right. And to me, that's where he fell a lot. Because I remember remember when he did the interview on the Breakfast Club, and
Mm-hmm.
I think we both kind of praised how he handled himself, even though it was kind of a hostile environment.
Right.
He sounded very much, together on it. But after the Trump thing, it's really where he just became a non-factor for me.
A non-starter. Yeah,
Yeah.
it's interesting, right? How things change so quickly, and that's what everyone has been saying up until now. They would never vote to reelect Adams. Everyone was saying, the indictment, remember the indictment and everything, and they were like, "Wow,
Yeah.
he's toast. There's no way." And now coming out this primary with Cuomo failing like he did, and Mamdani become the nominee, all of a sudden there's a lot more talk that he's back in the mix, right? It's almost like people don't love him, but they're more afraid to go with something else. It's like the devil versus in a way. It's a
Right.
weird dynamic. And I'm not going to say who it was, but I did speak to someone who is very involved in mayoral politics. And coming out of the primary, he asked me what my thoughts were. I said, "Oh, it was kind of a crazy thing. We'll see what happens." But he said to me, if you were to put a gun to his head now and force him to predict who is going to win in November at this point, he said he would bet on Eric Adams winning. I was like, wow.
Wow.
So,
Interesting.
yeah.
Well, I mean, he's the incumbent. He
Mm-hmm.
has won before. So, he knows how to run a campaign very well. Once he hits the road, there could be a big change here. My question now also is the, we're looking at the field now. We got one Republican, we've got three people pulling from the Democratic donor pool instead of saying they're don't Democrats, but pulling from that pool. The Trump administration would like to get a hold of New York City.
Mm-hmm.
What if they, ramp up supporting Sliwa, and get that
I
money
don't,
flowing from the
yeah.
Republican machine?
Here's the
And
thing. I understand where you're coming from, but number one, Trump does not like Sliwa at all. Like
I'm sure he
really
doesn't.
can't stand him.
I,
And I
I
think
would
it's
imagine
actually better here, and maybe this is where I sound a little conspiratorial. Is that a word?
conspiratorial.
Conspiratorial. Yeah. But I think Trump wants Mamdani to win because it's better for his brand.
I think if Mamdani wins, it would be a lot of fuel for Trump's
Yep.
rhetoric. Because
Yep.
anything,
And it helps him with the
anything that
midterms.
happens in New York, anything
Yep.
bad that happens in New York, he's going to blame on the Muslim.
Absolutely.
Even if
No matter
Mamdani
what it
does a
is.
great
No, it just
job,
gives him a target, like a bullseye. And then he's going to try to gain more seats in the midterms next year.
right?
Believe me, like this is going to be fuel for that. That's why I was saying earlier, this actually could be really bad for the Democrats' brand, right? Because of what this is going to do. Now, here's the poll that I wanted to pull up. This is what I said just to get these numbers out. So 51% of voters in New York City said they would never vote for Eric Adams.
Hmm.
46% say they would never vote for Mamdani. 39% never vote for Cuomo. So Cuomo's holding on to that poll, like, what is that?
It's not a big difference though between Mamdani and Cuomo. What was that 5%?
It's
Six?
7% difference.
Okay,
The thing
that's a
is,
little bit more.
the thing is, Mamdani is close to 50. He's close to where Eric Adams is. Like half of the people say they would never
Right,
vote,
right, right.
right? Whereas Cuomo is like at like 40%. So, you know, he does have
Yeah,
a bit of a leg up. That is what he is hanging his hat on now, right? He's saying
right.
I'm a candidate who's the least hated of the three.
Not exactly the
Not the
message.
most liked, but the least hated. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. So you know, listen, I think really, I think Cuomo said he was going to go independent. Not Cuomo.
Adams.
Said he was going to go independent from jump. I think even though I think his affiliation with Trump is what's most uncomfortable for me if he stays in the race. Asking him to drop out when he initially said I'm doing independent is kind of crazy when Cuomo came in saying I'm going to run Democrat. He lost. Like, okay, now I'm going to do independent. You would think you'd be like, no, you need to drop out, bro. Now you're just trying to
Mm.
take the seat for yourself. You're not really, you know. So,
Right. But there are so many people also. This is the consideration, right? So many people are coming to him right now and saying, "We need you. Our city needs you." You know what I mean? So sometimes you think of it as even being better, bigger than yourself. Because I've
oh,
been there myself too, right? Where sometimes
sure.
it's hard. Like, you're like, all right, like I don't know if I want to do this right now. But when everyone else is coming to you saying you have to, we need you to do it, then it's like, you're almost selfish to say no.
Yeah, I get that. And it just, some of that also makes me a little uncomfortable because one, where were those people in the primary? They should have pushed him to the win. And
Right.
now that Mamdani, the Democratic Socialist, the Muslim, the progressive, it
Mhm.
wins. Now they're like, oh, we need you, Cuomo. Like that tells me that it gives me a little bit of bigotry vibes from those
Well,
people
how
who,
do you know they weren't there in the primary? Maybe they were outnumbered in the Democratic primary, but they could have been pushing for Cuomo all along.
but if it's enough to make him win, yeah, it seems like that
Well, it
they,
wasn't enough to make him win the primary, but there's a
right.
different electorate now going into the general election. Not everyone is
Yeah.
a registered Democrat or
I
votes in
just,
primaries. Even people who are registered Democrats, by the way, don't always vote in the primary.
yeah, that's absolutely true. Yeah, I just don't like like you said, it's been vote blue no matter who and all this and that and this blue wave and all this. This is
Mm.
what we've been looking at for the past 10 years. Every time the election comes up and now a guy is in there not really feeling it, even though he did win fair and square, and they want him to,
Yeah,
you
I
know,
don't think like
but
I don't want to discount the presence of bigotry in that. Like you said, that there's
right,
always going to be some of that, right? You can't say that's never a factor. But
right.
I really do believe that if you took that aspect of it away, right? Let's say it was just a regular white dude who had the same politics, it would be a lot of maybe not exactly the same, but it would be a similar flavor of people saying we can't have this. This is, like this would be like De Blasio on crack, and you saw what De Blasio did. De Blasio scared people, but this is even more extreme policy wise than he was, and so. I lived through it with De Blasio. He was an Italian German guy who wants you to believe he was all Italian or whatever, but uh, people were very upset about some of his policies, and he wasn't as far to the left as Mamdani is.
You know what, I think we could kind of draw a parallel too, and just to be fair to Trump getting the nominee the first time.
Mm-hmm.
Because remember at that time the Republicans didn't want anything to do with him, and then he came up and he beat the field and he
Right.
took their nominee, and there was talk at that time of Republicans trying to replace him or run someone else because he wasn't what they wanted.
Right.
And so it's kind of similar in that way, like, listen, he won fair and square, unfortunately, for your party. You know, like
In
it
some ways,
in
yeah.
some
But
ways.
let's in some
But
ways,
there's
but
not
but but here's the thing. Yes, I think Trump did kind of take over the Republican. party, right?
Right.
And kind of made it his own, and that scared the establishment types. And that goes back to what you were saying earlier about this dynamic of the new wave versus the establishment. And yeah,
Right.
that's
Right.
part of it, the young versus the old, and all of that,
Good.
absolutely. But let's not forget this is beyond that, because this is someone who's not even saying I'm running to be just a Democrat. This is almost a different party. It's democratic socialism. It doesn't jive with what a lot of the more traditional liberal Democrats stand for, or old school Democrat, however you want to describe it. So it's more than just someone new coming in with new energy and making people uncomfortable, though
Right.
that's part of it, right? It's someone really redefining the party in a sense from the outsides. And again, I'm not saying he necessarily falls into this, but he comes from that same crew, right? The same lane of candidates who have said they're not even Democrats. They're just running in the Democratic Party because it's easier to win the elections that way in New York City. So
Right.
obviously there's going to be pushback to that. I mean, you have to expect that. And it
Sure.
also goes back to what I said a few weeks ago when we were having a discussion. Anytime you kind of challenge a norm in life, by definition, you're going to get a lot of pushback, because otherwise you're not challenging the norm, right? You're maintaining the status quo. If you're challenging that, right? If you're trying to do something new and different, because you're coming from the outside and presenting your ideas in a new way, or bringing new ideas to the table, by definition, you're going to get people who are very uncomfortable with that. There's nothing wrong with that philosophically or conceptually, right? But you have to expect it. It's going to happen. It's part of the territory. It comes with the territory.
Does that, I think that also raises the a question that Democrats and the Democratic establishment should be looking at, and the question of should this be a signal to them for evolution or change or incorporation of things that weren't traditionally what they were doing. We've seen, you know, Bernie Sanders get as high as he did in the presidential elections. He shouldn't have gotten that high under normal circumstances. We saw, like I said, Mdani just took that. We saw AOC take over an established position. We saw the squad do very well in that run. So there could be some ideas within those groups that the voters want to hear from that's not coming from.
Yeah,
They
I would
look
be
at that, they're
careful.
like, maybe we need to take a little bit of a look and adjust and
Well,
see what
when it
people
comes
are
to certain
wanting.
things, yeah, I think the youthful energy, right? Like you said, like we're saying, challenging the status quo, not being afraid to do things differently, think outside the box. That's all good. But I keep going back to this notion that you have a lane now, and the candidates, the officials you mentioned, are in that lane,
Right,
that are opposed, not just in terms of style and energy and youthful spirit, but even in terms of policy, opposed to what the Democrats. I mean, they're really their own party. They're really a third party, but they're
right,
running to co-opt the Democratic Party, which is why you have the split that you have, and why Republicans are doing well in different parts of the country. Now, you say that they represent something new that the voters are kind of pining for. Well, in their districts, right, where they are, where they're getting votes, they're doing well. But I
right,
think the question remains: what does that do to seats elsewhere, to districts elsewhere, right? Purple districts, competitive districts, right?
right,
Not safe blue seats where you can put in anyone and they will literally vote blue no matter who. I'm talking
right.
about a place like South Queens, or places in Long Island, throughout New York State, throughout the U.S. What I mean? There's districts like this everywhere that are more in the middle. And if Democrats want to do well there, well, I think there's a problem with these candidates who aren't even in the Democratic lane, kind of taking over the party and making voters think that they're all Democrats believe in what they do.
I definitely get that, especially for people who have a long history of it, or, you know, I also think that Democrats need to be aware, and they're not acknowledging that there's a big dissatisfaction with the Democratic Party
Yeah,
from
I agree.
minority groups who basically, especially in the African American
Yeah,
community, who are one of the rocks of the voting bloc for the Democratic Party, and they're looking elsewhere, which is
except
unfortunate.
I no, I agree. I agree totally with that. But let's be completely transparent here. If you look at the results of this mayoral primary, Cuomo won the black vote very heavily. It was the white voters that went to Mamdani.
That's very interesting. That is definitely very interesting. I just know that there is a lot of more talk these days
Yeah,
among some of the groups. They're saying, listen, they're taking that middle road, and I really
right.
hate to see where people are saying, oh, well, both parties are the same, and it's like,
Yeah,
because they're dissatisfied,
yeah.
right? And listen, the Democratic Party has failed the minority groups, the African American groups, many ways. They're not the same as the Republicans, though. I get some of the comparisons, but taking that route. So this idea of taking some of those people and putting them in the middle where they're like, okay, they're both the same, so it doesn't matter, or I'll look at whatever is kind of could be kind of a cautionary thing for
Hmm.
Democrats. You want them to
Democrats,
be
yeah,
on your
I agree. Yeah,
team.
no, I agree. And they need to do better with messaging. They need to do better with outreach. They do need to redefine themselves in certain ways, but you
Wow.
know, the answer isn't automatically let's create a police composite sketch of what the average voter is not looking for to be a leader, right? And run with that.
Well, I get that. Maybe Mamdani should say, hey, what did Trump say? Why not try something different? Why not try Mamdani?
Try the mango habanero. Listen,
Yeah.
this is a good metaphor for what's going on here. You try something different, but different doesn't always mean better.
Well, is it good though?
Uh, that's subjective. And
Is
like
it
I said, the mango part of it was good, but the habanero made me think I was eating chicken wings. So I don't know.
okay? So I guess so maybe Mamdani's a little bit of the mango. Oh,
A
no,
little bit of the chicken wing.
the mango is the Democrat side of
Hmm.
Mamdani, but his
Okay.
socialist side is the habanero. It's like, something's a little off here.
Right. Right.
So
Oh, listen, it's an interesting time, and you get what you deserve. I mean, we'll see. We'll see what happens, and then we'll see if people learn from it, what they learn from it. And I think a problem that we sometimes have now is that people are very stubborn and they want to take whatever happens and instead of actually learn from it or adopt to it, they want to use it to support their already existing conclusion or thought, right?
right,
That's part of why we don't have progress or we can't seem to
right,
get anywhere, right? Because, like I said, people are stubborn, unfortunately. So
right,
you would hope people would look at data, even to your points about, oh, look where the electorate is moving or look where the energy is. But everyone kind of has their preconceived notions about how the world is or should be.
right.
Instead of using the data to learn from, they're just using it to support their existing argument.
Right. And I think I think you can have the lane. Like for example, Democrats could have this lane that they're going in and recognize the data that says that there's a growing portion of people within in their voting bloc that is identifying as democratic socialists or even looking at some of those ideas and look at that and say, okay, well, how can we incorporate some of that? We may not go completely there, but maybe there's something that we can look at here that appeals to them and also, you know,
And it doesn't
on with
need
us.
to be about the ideas per se either. It could be, how do you capture that same kind of energy behind
Right,
your own ideas? Maybe you have your own good ideas that are different from those ideas, but
right,
you see a lot of energy, like young people with a lot of time on their hands going out, knocking 1,000 doors. Can you somehow appeal to them? Because while we said that the voters tend not to be young, although we saw more young voters than usual, there's still more older voters than younger voters. What you do get is more younger people spending more time volunteering because they have the time and the energy to do that. And they seem to be more energetic, even not just physically, right? I'm not talking about they have more energy because they're younger, they can stay up longer. I'm talking about maybe there's more ideological energy coming out of them, which is to be expected. When you're younger, you tend to be a little bit more ideological, right? A little more maybe naive to how the world works, and that's fine. But how do you capture that without necessarily taking the ideas that are unpopular, especially in your district, right? Because every district is going to be different. If a Democratic Socialist tried to run here in a general election, they wouldn't do so well, as we've seen. So, how do you take the energy and translate that to maybe more mainstream ideas, if you will? You know what I mean?
right.
Can you do that? Is it that the energy is only at the extremes now? And that's a problem I think we have on both sides of the aisle. there tends to be more energy at the extremes. But can you somehow get that energy without going to the ideological extreme?
Right. And I think that, yeah, that is definitely the trick. And I think the thing that both, we looking at Democrats and Republicans, if we look going back to the first Obama election, um, I think this kind of talks to that because, you know, Obama wasn't supposed to make it there, but we got that young vote, we got that energy there.
Hmm.
You know, Bernie Sanders shouldn't have got as far as he did, but he got that energy there, and it was some of that young vote as well. And I think it was more that Trump should not have made it there. He
Right.
got that energy. I think these were candidates that did not represent the establishment party at the time, and
Hmm.
people wanted that, or people were moving
Change,
towards
underdog
that.
energy, outsider energy,
Right.
populism, right? Populism, the kind of yeah, like take down the traditional system kind of energy.
Right, because people are frustrated
Yeah.
because doesn't matter who is in, things still keep going up. Your bills keep getting higher.
Right. Right.
Everything's still more expensive. And like I did the right thing. I voted for this person that said they've got my back, and it doesn't seem to have changed enough or any. Plus, there's unrealistic expectations on how much they could change immediately with opposition against them. All of that made people, I think, look at people that seem to be outside of that standard establishment candidacy, you know? And so that's can you make that excitement in the establishment without answering people's
It's interesting. Yeah.
grievances?
It's interesting because I did see a story recently. Someone posted their personal history with Mamdani. Actually, was a guy that I know, and I won't go too deep into it. But one of the things that I found interesting in his little story that he wrote was there was a candidate in his part of the city who didn't excite him at all because he was supported by the same, as he described it, the same old establishment and union types that back every Democratic candidate, whatever. And
Right.
they were trying to do something new and run from the outside. But if you come in, I don't know. I think maybe part of the problem is people aren't looking at people's history or backgrounds enough, or like really looking into what's going on here. Because if you come in as an outsider and you didn't start within the system, you actually challenge the system, right? Like we did. We didn't come in, we weren't a part of any establishment. You come in
Right.
with new ideas, right? A new face. Yeah, this is, I don't like the way that things are working. I'm trying to do things a different way, show you how you can have an alternative vision. And you work your way through, and it doesn't mean that you have to kiss the ring or like take an oath of loyalty or anything like that. But what you're doing is you're slowly getting people on your side who didn't start off on your side
Right.
because you're showing them your strength. Maybe you've run locally and picked up a lot of local support and made people go, oh, wait a minute, look at all the support this guy has. We want a piece of that too. You know what I mean? You're actually kind of forcing your way through the door, and you're garnering respect along the way, and then people are starting to support you even from higher up who didn't initially. Well, to me, that's an inspiring story, and that's what we should be striving to do. The story, shouldn't be, to me at least, how can we piss on the castle from the outside, and then as soon as you get into the castle, like, you no longer want. It's kind of like when people in music say, like, I like them more when they were underground, but like as soon as they got some success, they wouldn't even give them any time, even if they didn't change their artistic integrity in any way, right? It's just the fact that they're successful now means we
Right.
no longer can support them. I don't think that that's a winning mindset, right? I think that's like small dog energy. That's like a losing attitude, losing mentality. And
Right.
so when someone gets turned off by the very notion that someone has some what they would describe as mainstream or institutional or establishment support, I think that's a problem. I think you got to look deeper. That's reductive. You got to look deeper into it than that. Who are they really? What do they stand for? How do they get that support? What is their story? And in fact, I'll say this: in this case that I'm describing, they were talking about Justin Brandon, who came in as a punk rocker. He was actually in a punk rock band. He's not an establishment guy. You know what I mean? He, in time, got support from establishment because he got to work for his local council member and they helped get him endorsements, and he kind of worked his way through. But to me, I'm not like, oh, I can no longer support them because they're so boring because they got a union to back them. Like that's a little crazy. I think we should be trying to build on our support without writing people off just because they have support.
Yeah, and I agree with that. I think that at the same time, you've got people that are quite cynical about um, someone as an establishment candidate represents everything that they're frustrated with,
Mm-hmm. But
and
that's the
so
question. Exactly.
putting
But here's the question though. Just because they have establishment support, does that mean that they represent everything that they're frustrated with?
it doesn't, but they have an kind of an uphill battle in that regard with those
Right.
people. And I'll
Right.
give you an example. I just saw recently, and I was on Threads,
Mm-hmm.
and a tweet came, or I don't know, do you call them tweets on Threads or
Right. I think it's called a
thread?
thread.
A
Yeah. Yeah.
thread came through because it was rethreaded by
Mm-hmm.
someone on my list. It is for a candidate that's going to run against Marjorie Taylor Greene in Georgia.
Mm-hmm.
This guy is a former, I think, a brigadier general in the military. He's running to oppose what she's doing there. I looked at some of the stuff. It's all good. And then you look into whatever the thread was. It was like, I'm running to do this, and this, and that, and then oppose Marjorie Taylor Greene. Can I get a repost? And you look into the comments, and then here comes some of those purity tests from people, and they're like, um, and there were several who were like, "Oh no!" And they pull up an old news article where he was, as brigadier general, was appointed to be attaché in Israel at
Mm-hmm.
one point in his career that he was assigned to. And they're like, "No, you support Israel. We're not voting anybody for that." And it's like it didn't say he supported Israel. He didn't say any of that. It just
Mm-hmm. But I
some
think that
of that.
also speaks to the fact that there are some people you're never going to get, right? And like,
Right.
you just gotta know that's part of the game, also. But
Yeah, yeah. So it's some of that you've got uphill regardless, I guess, if you're running.
yeah,
It's
yeah, people, right? So people will typecast you. You're saying, and they'll say you're in this box, and therefore we're gonna look at you like everyone else we think is also in this box that we just put you in somewhat arbitrarily.
right, because I don't think he's held office before in that
Yeah.
regard. So, as far as what he's done or able to do or would do, it's still kind of based on whatever he's campaigning on.
Mm-hmm.
So, I went and looked through his campaign materials. I didn't see anything that said anything about, supporting Israel or going over this and that. Like it was, there were a lot of good points in his campaign. And so, but just being a Democrat in that, or just being assigned to whatever that mission was that he had to do, or
Right.
liaison he had to do, it was automatically people were opposing him because of it. So,
Yeah. But is that healthy? Because that happens every which way, right? Even if you're going to run in that democratic socialist lane, you're automatically again turning off a lot of the electorate who doesn't identify that way. So, like, is there a way to avoid that, or is that just the world that we're in right now, where people are so quick to want to put a label on you and say you have to be this? Like, that's why I try to avoid labels for myself, right? Like, I would look at the local newspapers and they said, well, I'm like the moderate candidate, but I would never say the word moderate or progressive or anything like that, because whatever word you choose, everyone wants to define you then in terms of what they think that is. And
right,
so, right now you're in that box. And that means that you can't have your own ideas on things really, because again, you're challenging what their notion of that is. And it just doesn't work for too many people. So, not to say that it's bad to challenge norms, and I think we do that
right.
all the time, but I think you have to maybe pick your battles and how you do that, right?
And to be fair, we have to be fair here. I think I would fall into that same category if it were someone that supported Trump. Like, no, you're not getting my vote. Like that's a purity test for me. Um,
Okay, well, that's not me.
huh?
That wasn't me.
What do you mean?
I didn't support Trump.
No, no,
Yeah,
no.
yeah.
I'm
So you
saying
have some limits yourself as to what you would look at as a purity test.
right. So
Yeah.
just like how some of the people were saying, he did this with with Israel, whatever. Like to me, if someone served in the Trump administration, or if they
Right.
supported him, voted for him, campaigned for him, like you are a non-starter for me. I don't, because there's a whole
And it's not, and
ideology
I don't
there
think,
that's
yeah, and I don't think it's wrong for voters to do that necessarily, but it depends, I guess, on how you're doing it. And like,
right,
it's not wrong to have a line. We all have principles, right? It's
right.
good to have principles. The question is, where are you drawing these lines, and how petty are you getting with them?
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. So, yeah, it's interesting, I guess. So we're gonna see how this plays out over the next. You think we should know a little bit of the direction within the next month as far as Mamdani, Cuomo,
We
and
should we should know, hopefully know a lot more in the next month, but who knows, right? I
but
mean,
once these guys get their
yeah,
campaigns, their general election campaigns more
we
in.
could, yeah, we absolutely could hear in the next week that Cuomo is dropping out. It's possible. Not saying it's definitely happening, but it's possible because they're going to try to see what support they can hold on to, right? If
Right.
it's gone, if there's no path, not commercially, but financially, to campaign in the to compete in the general election, then they'll probably get out the way. But that needs to happen first. And right now, they're kind of playing chicken with each other.
Mike, I wonder though, like I think as far as financially competing, I don't think Cuomo is going to have an issue at all.
Yeah, but if he loses the people who were backing him in the primary, if they're all gone, is he going to
Yeah,
compete
but
just
do you
with
think they
small dollar
would though?
donations?
If they
There
would,
is so a lot of people, from what I'm hearing, a lot of people are flirting with the idea of putting their money behind Adams.
okay.
We're backing Cuomo in the primary.
And I wonder where's the Democratic Party going? Because I mean, you would think that they're going to put their
Well,
muscle behind their candidate.
so don't forget, in New York, you have county parties, right? There's not one party that really speaks to this as much as each individual county has their own party. I mean, there is a state party and that kind of thing, but in these elections, you're really looking at the local parties, which are county parties. And I believe the Manhattan Club, I think even the Brooklyn Club, are getting behind Mamdani so far. But the other ones, I don't think I've seen what happened yet. It's still new. He's meeting with them. I think he recently had a meeting with a Manhattan Democratic Club, and so he's basically going to them and saying, "I know I'm not a typical Democratic candidate, but I won the nomination. Can I have your support?"
Right. Yeah. So this is going to be interesting. I think funding wise, I think yeah, Adams and Mamdani, I think are going to be probably scrambling more than Cuomo. I
I
would
don't
imagine.
think Mamdani is. I think Mamdani is made now in terms of funding.
Think so?
Yeah,
Even if people start thinking, okay, well, we want to go with something that's more
he still
traditional, even if
has
they're
he still
independent.
has a lot of energy on his side.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
So, but then maybe it's Adams who's going to be
Adams
looking.
just did a big fundraiser in the Hamptons, and it was funny that someone called him out because he was saying that Cuomo, I think he said Cuomo, or he was calling people out of touch with everyday Democrats, and they're like, "You're doing a fundraiser at like a billionaire's house in the Hamptons." It was kind of a funny visual.
Right. I think Sliwa mentioned something like that. In that Fox interview, he said that you know, Eric Adams, he said he was headed to Coney Island to do some
Mm,
campaigning, but meanwhile, Eric Adams was in the Hamptons. Andrew Cuomo was missing in action,
right.
and Mamdani was actively campaigning among Gen Z and millennials. So,
Listen, should they all stay in and just let people vote for whichever?
yeah, I mean, it's their right to do so. Uh,
Yeah.
you know, I don't, my pick would be Adams to drop out. Even though he
Like I
is
said, if you make me pick one to drop out now, I would say Adams, but I don't think we have to decide at this moment.
right, right.
So,
So,
all right, give us a bottom line to all this, Jay. Is there one? Maybe you can tie
uh,
it back to the ice cream.
I thought we had a bottom line at the beginning,
We
about
had a
looking at
bottom. That's a
something
top line. That's not a bottom line.
about, leaving things open for something that may be a little bit different.
Mm, mm.
Mamdani in this case is not the traditional candidate for mayor for Democrat. Um, people may need to give a little bit of grace and see where he's got to say. Let the campaign run. Um,
Well,
Eric
okay.
Adams, you know, uh,
You know
I'll
what's
give
okay?
that.
Go ahead. Yeah, I just got so many thoughts popping in my head as you're saying these things. Like, it's a little frustrating to me. Now you're seeing all these stories come out about Mamdani in particular. Where were they in the primary? And everyone's like, like the whole thing about the college application, which was silly, but all these things are coming out. Like, look what he said back then. Look what he did then. Look what's on his website. Why was it in the primary that no one even talked about? Was that a failure on the opposition's part? I mean, why is it coming out now after he won?
Yeah, I don't know. I think the only thing that briefly popped up from what I was able to witness was just that he used to be a rapper.
And no one
And
cared
that
about it.
really didn't
No, but I'm
that
talking
didn't
about like
the
things that
radar.
they're actually trying to say are kind of somewhat scandalous, though. Which
Right.
things have been popping up, right? About
Yeah.
his views on Israel, also, and some anti-Semitism accusations, and there's a
Right.
lot of stuff. But you didn't hear as much of it in the primaries.
Right. Right. There was the article, and I forget which publication posted it, that basically said that, uh, Mamdani has no work experience
Right,
outside of 3 years.
right.
Um, and so, like, who are we getting here, basically? That was really,
But I think that was part, if I'm not mistaken, that was part of the New York Times piece before the primary, saying you shouldn't rank him because he had no experience.
right, right. So,
Some of it did come out in the primary. It's a little frustrating to me to see all these stories pop up now, and I'm like, where was that before? And why is it
right,
you wait till someone wins an election of this magnitude before you start releasing information that might have helped inform the voters' decision? It's like a little late for
right,
that now, you know. But that goes to your point about wait to see where he stands on things, and we should have already gotten all that by now. And to be fair, we got a lot of it policy wise already. We know that, but you would think with an election as competitive as this was supposed to be, we would have had all the information by now.
Well, I mean, not necessarily where he stands on things, even though I think of the candidates' websites we
Mm,
looked at platforms, his was lighter than some of the others. But more, where the people stand in this general election at this point? Are they warming up to something different
right.
to Mamdani, or are they like, well, you know what? I'm not really wanting that. Maybe go to someone I know a little bit more. So,
Right. Or waiting to see, I guess this fits your bottom line as well, waiting to see how the election shapes up, right? What are the actual competitive choices in November?
right. Yeah. So I think, we should just also be open to, maybe some things need to be done a little bit differently. Maybe there are something that traditionally we hadn't done that we might want to think about and see, there could be something that we benefit from, we might not benefit from.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so
And even if you lose an election, you can sometimes have a positive impact on the conversation, right? So maybe
absolutely.
pushing the person who wins in a little bit of a different direction too.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I mean, the 2012 election was perfectly
You
aligned
got
with.
the office in Rockaway.
Yeah, I mean that was still something
Yeah,
that affected people and moved
of
the
course,
conversation in a
of
certain
course.
way. And so, you know, yeah, I think it's all necessary. So,
All right. Well, I guess there's always TBD on this stuff. And
yeah.
thank you for tuning in. People can find us everywhere podcasts can be found, right? Nuance with Mike Scala and Jay Carter. We're on YouTube, Nuance with Mike Scala and Jay Carter, Instagram, Reddit, check the social media. We got a Facebook page now.
Yeah.
So we thank you all for checking us out. As always, we've got work to do, and we'll catch you next time. Hopefully the audio sounded good this time. We'll test that as well. Take care.